I woke up on the cold hardwood floor of our living room with the soft flicker of Christmas lights blurring in and out of my vision like distant stars dancing above me, and for a moment I did not understand why my left side felt as if it were burning from the inside out. A warm rush spread beneath my hip, sticky and slow, and the metallic scent hit my nose before the pain crashed down fully like a wave breaking over my ribs. I tried to push myself up, but my arm slipped in the pool forming around me. Only then did my eyes focus enough to see the red, staining the floorboards, thin streams of it branching out beneath the blinking white lights that wrapped around the Christmas tree. My breathing hitched shallow and uneven, and I forced my gaze upward. Standing over me was Ryan, my stepbrother, the boy my mother adored beyond reason, the one Charles insisted was the future of this family. His chest rose and fell too quickly, his breath shaky, but his expression was disturbingly empty. No panic, no shock, not even anger, just a hollow blankness that made the hairs on my arms lift. The kitchen knife in his hand glistened in the shifting lights, the fresh blood reflecting tiny shards of brightness. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, and I felt something colder than the hardwood floor settle into my bones. I barely managed to whisper his name, though the sound was nothing more than a dry rattle from the back of my throat, and he did not move or respond. Instead, he shifted his grip on the knife with a slow, deliberate motion as if he were adjusting a pin rather than a weapon. The wall clock above the fireplace chimed twice each chime, echoing through the silent house in a way that felt almost mocking. 2 a.m. Christmas Eve. A night that should have felt warm and safe and filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. Yet here I was, bleeding on the living room floor beneath a tree we had decorated together only a week earlier. I gathered what little strength I had and called out for my mother, though the word came out cracked and broken, my voice barely audible. Still the sound of footsteps approached, hurried at first, then hesitant, as my mother reached the bottom of the stairs. She froze at the sight of me, her hand tightening on the banister. Her eyes widened in shock, but before the emotion could settle into anything real, she let out a shaky laugh, the kind of awkward sound people make when they do not know how to react. "Melissa," she said, her voice laced with annoyance. "What on earth are you doing on the floor?" I tried to tell her. I tried to point at the knife in Ryan's hand, but my arm trembled violently and dropped back to the floor with a weak thud. A small cry escaped my lips, high and thin, as the pain intensified. My mother's brief worry faded as quickly as it appeared, replaced with irritation that wrinkled the corners of her mouth. "You cannot keep doing this," she muttered. "Not tonight. Not again." I stared at her disbelief and hurt mixing with the pounding fear in my chest. I tried to push the words out. "He stabbed me." "Mom, please." But all that left my mouth was a sound that barely resembled language. Charles appeared behind her, rubbing his eyes like an exhausted father woken too early by a misbehaving child. His face tightened in frustration. "Melissa, are you trying to ruin Christmas Eve? Look at this mess." His tone made it clear that I was the problem, not the growing pool of blood beneath me or the knife still in Ryan's hand. My vision flickered as my mother turned to Ryan, but she did not scream, did not ask why he was holding a weapon, did not rush to help me. She simply asked if everything was fine in a tired voice. Ryan answered before she could say more, his tone low and steady. She tried to ruin everything. She had to be stopped. My mother's lips parted, confusion flickering across her face. But instead of questioning him, instead of stepping between us, she looked back at me with something close to disappointment. I realized then that she would never believe me. Not tonight. Not ever. My breath grew thinner, each inhale sharp and shallow. I tried to crawl, but pain exploded from my left side and tore a gasp from my lungs. The lights on the tree blurred again, turning into streaks of white and gold as my head rolled to the side. The star at the top flickered once twice, then dimmed as if even it were losing its strength. Somewhere in the distance I heard sirens approaching, the sound cutting through the fog, settling over my mind. Strong arms lifted me, voices grew louder, and cold air brushed across my skin as they carried me out of the house. I caught one last glimpse of my mother standing in the doorway, her arms folded, her eyes filled with something I could not name. In that moment, a truth settled into me with painful clarity, a truth I could not run from, even as consciousness slipped away. In that house, I was the only one who wanted me alive. From the outside, anyone driving past our house on Willow Creek Lane would have believed we were the kind of blended family people liked to feature in holiday commercials, the kind where everyone sits around a perfectly lit Christmas tree sipping hot cocoa and laughing about old memories, the kind where the parents beam with pride and the children glow with warmth. That was the image my mother worked tirelessly to manufacture. She loved presenting us as a united household, complete with coordinated holiday sweaters, matching stockings above the fireplace, and the kind of posed family photos where smiles are frozen in place, even if someone's jaw aches from holding it too long. Her Facebook feed was a carefully curated gallery of perfection, all warm filters and heartfelt captions about love, gratitude, and second chances in life. To her friends and co-workers, she was the devoted mother who had finally rebuilt her life after a painful divorce, marrying a man who treated her well and embracing his son as if he were her own. People often commented on how lucky she was. Whenever she read those comments, she would smile in that quiet, triumphant way as though she had won something important. Charles, my stepfather, helped maintain the illusion with ease. He had a certain polished charm that made him instantly likable in public. He was the kind of man who shook hands firmly, remembered everyone's names, and made polite jokes at barbecues. He built his personality around being respectable and composed, the kind of man neighbors waved to from their driveways. He held doors open for the elderly, tipped generously at restaurants, and always spoke fondly about family values. Yet behind closed doors, that charming exterior stiffened into something sharper, something that left no room for disagreement or deviation from his standards. He was a traditionalist in the worst sense, believing that a house should run according to his rules, not because they were fair or reasonable, but because he was the one who made them. And central to those rules was the belief that Ryan, his biological son, could do no wrong. Ryan, with his easy grin and confident swagger, was the star of our household. He knew how to charm adults with polite manners and clever remarks, and he knew how to twist that charm into something darker when no one else was looking. At school, he seemed friendly, popular even, but anyone who paid attention long enough could sense the simmering arrogance beneath the surface. Teachers adored him because he behaved well when he needed to, and neighbors saw him as the polite young man who carried groceries for the elderly or helped shovel driveways after a snowstorm. With that image, he could get away with almost anything. And often, he did. To the outside world, we were a family that blended seamlessly. Melissa and Ryan people would say two siblings brought together by fate, proof that love could rebuild what was broken. No one knew that inside the house I never felt like anyone's daughter. I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, tolerated rather than wanted. I felt like the quiet shadow in photographs meant to depict unity. Ever since my mother married Charles, they had watched my place shrink. Decisions were made around me rather than with me. If I expressed a different opinion, I was told I was being dramatic or disrespectful. If I tried to carve out any space of my own, I was reminded that this was not just my home anymore, and that blended families required sacrifice. Those sacrifices always came from me. My mother started to treat Ryan's wants and moods as delicate things that needed constant protection. If Ryan snapped at me, she would tell me he was under pressure. If he took something of mine, she would say, "Boys his age did not always understand boundaries." If I got upset, she would sigh and ask why I could not be a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little more forgiving. I sometimes wondered whether she saw me at all, or whether she only saw the idea of a perfect family she was determined to prove to the world. Charles watched everything through a lens of superiority, as though he were the king of the household and I a subject expected to fall in line. When conflicts arose, he never paused to consider my side. Instead, he assumed that I was at fault because to him, Ryan was incapable of wrongdoing. He praised Ryan for every little thing and dismissed me for anything that disrupted his narrative. Charles had a way of looking at me as though I were a problem needing correction, not a person with her own needs, fears, or boundaries. And Ryan learned from both of them how to mold their perceptions. He played the role of perfect son, beautifully offering help when someone was watching, apologizing politely if he ever got caught doing something questionable, then smirking at me when their backs were turned. He knew exactly how to keep his halo glowing in the eyes of the adults while letting his darker impulses roam freely when no one else noticed. Whenever the four of us went out together, strangers would compliment us on how close we seemed. My mother would beam with pride. Charles would nod with satisfaction, and Ryan would drape an arm casually around my shoulder like a brother who adored his sister. I would smile because that was what was expected of me, even if inside I felt the weight of a truth I could never say aloud. We were not a perfect family. We were not even a good one. We were a staged production carefully maintained for public approval, while behind the curtains I lived with the quiet dread of knowing something was fundamentally wrong. I could see cracks in the foundation long before anyone else cared to. Those cracks eventually became fractures, then chasms, but no matter how wide they grew, the illusion remained intact for anyone who wanted to believe it. I think that is why no one questioned anything Ryan did. They saw him as the golden son of a golden family, and in families that appear perfect, no one wants to imagine the rot beneath the surface. They want to believe the story even when the truth is bleeding on the floor. The first real crack in the illusion of our so-called perfect family appeared on a rainy Thursday afternoon, though at the time I did not realize how significant the moment truly was. It began with something small, something so ordinary that most families would have shrugged it off as a minor accident, but in our house, even accidents had a way of exposing loyalties. I had come home from a long day of classes exhausted, and looking forward to working on an important project that required my laptop, a device I had saved for months to buy. I opened the door to my room and stopped cold. My laptop was lying on the floor, the screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern spreading outward from the center, as if someone had stepped on it. The charger was still plugged into the wall, but the cord had been stretched so tightly that it looked like someone had yanked it in frustration. My backpack was unzipped, its contents scattered across the carpet. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I knelt beside the laptop, gently touching the broken screen, even though part of me already knew who had caused it. Before I could examine it further, I heard Ryan's footsteps in the hallway, slow and unhurried. He appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame with that familiar smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. He asked what happened, as if he had just discovered the mess along with me, but something in his tone, that slight lilt of amusement, made my skin prickle. I told him the truth that someone had been in my room and my laptop was now ruined, but before I could say more, he let out a light laugh and claimed I must have dropped it earlier and forgotten. The comment stung, not because it was clever, but because it was designed to make me doubt my own memory and judgment. When I asked him directly if he had been in my room, his smirk deepened, and he shrugged, saying something vague about looking for a charger, as though rummaging through my belongings without permission was perfectly reasonable. I was angry, but I was not prepared for what happened next. When my mother and Charles came home, I immediately told them what had happened. I held up the laptop, the cracked screen reflecting my own anxious expression, and waited for them to react. I expected them to be upset, or at the very least concerned. Instead, Charles barely glanced at it before sighing loudly and asking why I could not learn to take better care of my things. He spoke to me as if I were a small child who had broken a toy, not someone whose property had been violated. I tried to explain, insisting that I had not dropped it and that Ryan had admitted to being in my room, but Charles cut me off with a dismissive wave. He pointed out that Ryan would never be careless like that and that accusing him was unfair. My mother chimed in with her own explanation, which sounded rehearsed, even though she had only just walked in. She said Ryan must have been stressed from school and looking for an outlet. She reminded me that blended families took effort and understanding, and that sometimes we all had to compromise. Somehow, that compromise always meant Ryan's actions were justified and my boundaries were negotiable. The injustice of it all made my chest tighten. I tried again to explain, but every word I said seemed to make the situation worse. Charles's expression hardened, and he raised his voice just enough to remind me who held authority in the house. He scolded me for being dramatic, for making baseless accusations, for trying to start a conflict. It did not matter that I was the one who had been wronged. What mattered was maintaining the narrative that Ryan was the stable one, the responsible one, the one who could do no wrong. Ryan stood behind them during all of this, arms folded, an innocent smile plastered across his face. He even had the nerve to offer an apology that felt rehearsed and insincere, claiming he was sorry if I felt upset, but insisting again that he had not touched my laptop. His voice wavered perfectly, giving him just enough vulnerability to win sympathy. My mother patted his arm and told him it was all right, that she understood. She did not look at me when she said it, but the message was loud and clear. I was the problem because I dared to question him. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It was the first time I fully understood how alone I was in that house, how the balance of power was stacked so heavily against me that even when I was telling the truth, it sounded like a lie, simply because it did not fit the image my mother and Charles wanted to protect. After the confrontation, I returned to my room and closed the door, resisting the urge to slam it. I sat on the edge of my bed with the broken laptop in my lap, staring at the cracked reflection of my face. I tried to breathe through the frustration building in my chest, the sting of betrayal sinking deeper with each passing second. Outside my door, I could hear Ryan laughing downstairs, undoubtedly recounting the scene to my mother in a way that painted him as the victim. I imagined her nodding sympathetically, reassuring him that I was just going through a phase. My stomach twisted as I realized this was not a one-time incident. It was the beginning of something larger, something darker. Ryan had learned that he could cross boundaries without consequence. He had learned that if he damaged my property or invaded my privacy, he would not only escape punishment, but also gain sympathy. And with that knowledge, he moved with a confidence that made every room he entered feel smaller. I lay awake that night, replaying the moment I found my laptop on the floor, wondering how something so small could unravel my sense of safety so quickly. I wanted to believe things could still change, that my mother would see the truth someday, but deep down, a quiet voice whispered that this was only the beginning and that the storm I sensed gathering on the horizon was far from over. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a maze where every turn led to another wall built from denial, blame, and twisted logic that left me second-guessing my own memories. It began gradually, as most gaslighting does, with small comments that could be brushed aside if I tried hard enough to convince myself they meant nothing. But little by little, those comments multiplied until every conversation felt like a trap designed to confuse me, weaken me, and reshape the truth into whatever version best protected Ryan and the fragile image of our so-called perfect household. One night, after lying awake for hours, listening to faint creaks outside my bedroom door, I finally confronted my mother at breakfast. I told her Ryan had been in my room again around midnight, something I was certain of, not only because I heard the soft turn of the doorknob, but because I had felt that familiar chill of being watched, the sense that someone was standing too close in the dark. My mother paused only long enough to sip her coffee, barely glancing up before dismissing me with a weary sigh. She said I had always been imaginative, that sometimes I misheard things or let stress cloud my perception. Her tone was so casual that for a moment I questioned myself, wondering if the exhaustion from school and the tension of the past few weeks were making me paranoid. But before I could reason through it, she added that I should be careful about accusing Ryan of things without proof because it might damage the family dynamic they were trying to build. The way she said it, as though my concerns were an inconvenience rather than signs of something deeply wrong, made my chest tighten. Later that same week, I approached Charles because I heard the footsteps again. This time, the doorknob had actually turned twice before pausing. I knew it was not my imagination. When I told him what had happened, he stared at me with a look that hovered between frustration and disbelief. He said doors in old houses often creaked and that my imagination had always been overly active. Then he delivered one of his favorite lines, the one he pulled out in every conversation about privacy. In this house, we do not lock doors. Families do not hide things from each other. The hypocrisy of that statement nearly made me choke. Ryan had free access to everything, including my belongings, yet I was not even allowed to keep my room secure from him. I tried to explain that I did not feel safe, that I needed boundaries, but Charles cut me off with a stern glare and said boundaries were meaningless if they made the family uncomfortable. In other words, my comfort meant nothing if it inconvenienced Ryan. The tension grew heavy enough to seep into my daily routine. I started sleeping with a chair propped against the door, not because it would stop someone determined to enter, but because the sound of the chair scraping the floor would warn me. Some nights I stayed awake until sunrise, listening for the soft shift of footsteps in the hallway. I lost the ability to tell when I was imagining footsteps and when they were real. My thoughts ran in circles, replaying every sound I had heard since the laptop incident, every flicker of a shadow under my door, every smirk on Ryan's face that seemed to promise something worse was coming. My best friend Nina noticed the change in me long before anyone else did. We sat together in the parking lot outside school one afternoon, the winter wind cutting through our coats as we shared a bag of cold fries. She watched me closely, concern written across every line of her face. When I told her what had been happening, her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She asked to see the bruise on my arm where Ryan had grabbed me during a brief argument the previous week. I had tried to forget the moment he pushed past me in the hallway, and his fingers dug into my skin, leaving a purple mark shaped unmistakably like his hand. Nina stared at the bruise and shook her head. This is not normal. This is not sibling rivalry. Melissa, you are being gaslit. The word hit me hard, even though part of me had already suspected it. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way I had not been ready for. Nina explained it gently, telling me gaslighting was when someone manipulated you into questioning your own memory perception or sanity. She said it often happened in relationships where one person wanted control. She said it happened in toxic families all the time. I wanted to dismiss her words, to believe my mother and Charles were simply stressed or overwhelmed, but deep down, I knew Nina was right. The pattern was too clear. Every time something happened that made me uncomfortable or frightened, my family insisted it was imaginary. Every time I tried to protect myself, they told me I was causing problems. Every time Ryan crossed a boundary, they treated it as harmless normal or somehow my fault. Still, part of me clung to the hope that maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe if I gathered enough evidence, they would finally see the truth. That fragile hope shattered the night my mother confronted me about the bruise Nina had seen. She asked where it came from, and when I hesitated for even a second, she sighed as though she already knew the answer she wanted. She said I was probably bumping into things because I had been distracted lately. She said I always had a tendency to make injuries seem worse than they were. She said if I told people Ryan had caused it, I would only embarrass myself. Her words sank into me like ice water. I tried to tell her what had actually happened, but her expression hardened with every word until she finally cut me off by saying she was tired of the drama. She told me Ryan would never hurt me. She told me I needed to stop trying to create problems where none existed. She told me I was making everyone miserable. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, feeling the walls of the house tighten around me like a vice. I was trapped in a place where my reality held no weight, and where the truth was whatever made Ryan look innocent. The more I tried to cling to my version of events, the more they framed me as unstable, emotional, or manipulative. Gaslighting erodes you, slowly wearing down your confidence until you begin to doubt even the things you know for certain. And in that house, I was starting to lose pieces of myself, one denial at a time. It started with $40 disappearing from my wallet, an amount small enough that I initially wondered if I had misplaced it or forgotten a purchase somewhere along the way, but large enough to leave a tick of doubt pulsing at the back of my mind. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to let paranoia twist every strange moment into something sinister, but that seed of uncertainty stayed with me like a tiny thorn lodged beneath my skin. A few days later, I opened my drawer to grab the small envelope where I kept emergency cash, and my stomach tightened when I noticed the neatly stacked bills had become noticeably thinner. I counted them 3 times, hoping I had somehow remembered the amount wrong, but each count confirmed the truth. Money was vanishing. I tried to retrace my steps, thinking maybe I had lent some to a friend or used it for a school expense, but nothing added up. I had not spent that money. I had not touched the envelope at all. It should have been full. The realization hit me with the same cold clarity as a splash of ice water. Someone had taken it, and that someone had to be living under the same roof as me. I wanted to run downstairs and demand an explanation from my mother or Charles, but I also knew exactly how that conversation would go. They would tell me I miscounted. They would tell me I was imagining things. They would tell me boundaries did not need to be so rigid in a family. They would tell me anything except the truth. Instead, I decided to observe, to wait, to pay attention. That weekend, I noticed a new pair of wireless headphones sitting on the kitchen counter, the kind that cost far more than Ryan's part-time job could reasonably afford. He claimed a friend had given them to him as an early Christmas gift, but when I asked who, he shrugged and said a guy from school whose name he conveniently could not remember. His tone was light and casual, but there was a flash in his eyes I knew too well, a flicker of satisfaction that made my stomach twist. A week later, I logged into my email and found a digital receipt for a gaming subscription I did not buy tied to the card number on my debit account. For a moment, I froze, staring at the screen as dread settled over me. I contacted the bank, thinking maybe it was a mistake, but the representative confirmed the charge had been made using my account. When I checked my card, I realized it had been sitting in my wallet the entire time untouched, which meant someone had taken the information without taking the card itself. I knew then that this was no accident. It was intentional. Someone was taking money from me slowly, methodically, hoping I would not notice or would blame myself. And I had a sickening suspicion about who that someone was. That night, I confronted my mother. I explained the missing cash, the email receipt, the unfamiliar subscription. She listened with an expression that blended impatience and disbelief. When I finished, she asked one simple question spoken so softly it made my skin crawl. "Are you sure you did not spend it?" The implication stung. I insisted I had not. She gave me a tired sigh, as though she were dealing with a child who had lost her allowance and was now blaming imaginary monsters under the bed. She said I had been stressed lately, and stress made people forget things. She suggested I probably made purchases I did not remember or mixed up accounts. She said I should keep better track of my finances. I felt something inside me snap. I asked her if she could at least talk to Ryan, ask if he had seen anything unusual. At the mention of his name, her expression hardened. She said she would not drag him into this because it was unfair to accuse him without proof, and that I needed to stop trying to turn everything into a conflict. She said I needed to grow up. The words settled in my chest like stones. Later, when Charles came home, I brought up the missing money again, hoping maybe he would react differently, but he only gave a dismissive grunt. He said teenagers mismanage money all the time, and that I was overreacting. When I told him about the digital receipt, he said online banking was confusing and easy to mix up, implying the problem was me, not the suspicious charges. He finished the conversation with an annoyed wave of his hand, telling me Ryan would take a look at the bank statements later since he was better with technology. The irony was almost unbearable. The very person I suspected was now being given the authority to investigate. The next morning, the printed bank statements I had left on the dining table were gone. I searched everywhere, even the trash, but they had vanished completely. When I asked about them, Charles claimed he did not remember seeing any papers at all. My mother said maybe the wind had blown them off the table when she opened the door. The door had not been opened. I knew then Ryan had taken them. That evening, as I passed him in the hallway, he gave me a slow, knowing smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was not even a mocking one. It was the smile of someone who had already won a game I did not know I was playing. He leaned in close enough that I felt his breath near my ear, and whispered that I should keep better track of my things. My heart pounded so loudly I felt dizzy. The missing money, the erased evidence, the new purchases, he could not explain the smirks, the lies. It all fit, but every time I tried to confront the situation, the narrative twisted. Suddenly, I was irresponsible. I was forgetful. I was dramatic. I was the problem. Not him, never him. And as the days passed, each new discrepancy in my finances chipped away at my sense of stability until I no longer trusted my own memory. That was the most dangerous part. Gaslighting does not always start with emotions. Sometimes it begins with numbers missing receipts, vanished bank statements, and $40 bills that slip through your fingers like smoke. Small enough to be dismissed. Small enough to doubt yourself. Small enough to let the truth be rewritten in someone else's favor. What I did not know then was that these small cracks were the early signs of a much deeper rot. A rot tied not only to Ryan's growing need for control, but to a financial desperation he was hiding at a cost I would not fully understand until it was nearly too late. The shift in Ryan's behavior was so subtle at first that I could almost convince myself I was imagining it, but the more I tried to dismiss the unease creeping under my skin, the stronger it grew. It began with small changes in the way he moved around the house, slipping silently from room to room as if he were studying the layout, learning the rhythm of my routines, memorizing the times I was alone, the times I was distracted, and the times I let my guard down. I started noticing him in the hallway more often than before, standing in places where he did not belong, leaning against the wall just outside my door with the kind of calm stillness that made every hair along my arms rise. Sometimes when I opened my bedroom door, he would be there leaning casually as if he had simply stopped to tie his shoe, but his eyes never matched the casual tone of his posture. They were sharp, observant, glinting with a quiet knowledge I could not name. He would smile as he walked away, but it was the kind of smile that felt like a warning, a silent reminder that he could appear whenever he pleased. The sound of his footsteps began to haunt the nights. Soft, deliberate, paced just slowly enough that I knew he wanted me to hear him. He rarely spoke during these moments as if the silence itself was meant to send a message. I would lie in bed, blanket pulled to my chin, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards as he moved outside my door, sometimes stopping long enough that I could picture him standing there with his ear pressed to the wood. One night, I woke with the undeniable feeling that someone was in the room with me. My heart pounded as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and for a split second, I saw the faint outline of a figure near my desk. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare, but in the morning, the drawer where I kept my documents was slightly ajar. I had closed it tightly the night before. It was then that I started keeping a notebook tucked beneath my mattress, logging every moment that felt off. At first, I wrote sporadically, but as the days passed, the entries grew more frequent. Heard footsteps at 1:47 a.m. Drawer open again. Ryan passed my door 3 times in 5 minutes. He smiled when I caught him staring. None of the entries felt dramatic at the time, but taken together, they painted a picture that terrified me. The more I kept track, the more patterns I noticed. Ryan always seemed to appear when I was alone. If I went downstairs to get water, he would show up moments later, even if he had been in his room a second earlier. If I sat in the living room, he would wander in with no clear reason, pacing slowly through the space as though mapping it. If I opened a window or turned on a light, he often followed, watching me with a curious intensity that made my stomach twist. One evening, I was sitting at the dining table finishing homework when I felt eyes on me. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, holding a glass of water he never drank. He stared without blinking, his expression unreadable, and then he tilted his head slightly, almost like he was studying an animal in a cage. When I asked what he wanted, he smiled and said nothing. He simply walked away, leaving behind a chill so deep I felt it long after he disappeared down the hall. My mother and Charles dismissed every concern I brought to them. They insisted Ryan was just adjusting to changes in his life, that he was under stress, that I needed to show more compassion. They told me I was misinterpreting his actions, that I was making things bigger than they really were. They said everyone goes through phases, but phases do not look like someone watching you sleep. Phases do not look like someone rummaging through your belongings. Phases do not look like someone appearing everywhere you are at all hours with no explanation. One night, while lying awake and staring at the ceiling, I heard a faint whisper through the crack beneath my door. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but the sound came again, soft and deliberate, a single phrase spoken in a low voice that sent my entire body rigid. "I know what you are hiding." My breath caught in my throat. I sat up slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears, and strained to listen, but the hallway had gone silent. I waited frozen until my legs began to cramp. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. The following morning at breakfast, Ryan walked into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. He greeted my mother with a cheerful good morning kiss to the top of her head and poured himself a bowl of cereal. When our eyes met, he flashed that same unsettling smile, the one that curled at the edges and carried secrets I did not want to know. Then he mouthed a single word. Careful. My spoon clattered against the table. My mother asked if everything was all right, but Ryan spoke before I had the chance. He said I had been jumpy lately, stressed from school, maybe not sleeping well. He sounded sincere, concerned even, and my mother nodded sympathetically. I stared at him stunned by how easily he manipulated the narrative, how effortlessly he positioned himself as the reasonable one while painting me as unstable. Every day after that felt like walking deeper into a forest where the trees leaned in closer, making the path narrower, darker, harder to escape. Ryan knew he controlled the narrative. He knew no one believed me. He knew he could move through the house unchecked. And with each passing day, his confidence grew. The more he took from me, the more invisible I became to the people who were supposed to protect me. I did not know exactly what he wanted yet, but I felt it in my bones that he was building towards something that would shatter whatever sense of safety I had left. And deep down, I knew that if I did not find a way to protect myself soon, the next step in his quiet takeover would be far more dangerous than missing money or whispered threats in the dark. The decision to install a camera in my room was not something I reached lightly. It grew out of a collection of moments that pressed against me like invisible hands, each one nudging me closer to a truth I did not want to admit. By the time I finally acted, I felt as though I were living in a house where reality shifted at Ryan's will, where my words evaporated the second they left my mouth, and where every shadow outside my bedroom door carried the possibility of danger. The night before I bought the camera, I sat on Nina's couch with a blanket draped over my shoulders, trembling without understanding why. I told her everything. The missing money, the whispers outside my door, the nights when I woke to the feeling of eyes on me, the bruise shaped like Ryan's grip, the way my mother and Charles insisted I was imagining it all. Nina listened in silence, her expression darkening with every detail I shared. When I finished, she did not waste time with empty reassurances. She simply asked why I had not recorded anything yet. Record something. The idea had not occurred to me in a concrete way. My mind had been too clouded by fear and self-doubt to think strategically. But Nina saw everything clearly. She reminded me that proof was the only thing that would cut through the thick fog of denial my family had wrapped around the situation. She reminded me that people cannot argue with footage even if they want to. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint clicks and groans of the house settling. I thought of every moment I had been dismissed, every time my mother told me I was being dramatic, every time Charles rolled his eyes, every time Ryan smirked because he knew they would take his side. Proof. The word echoed in my mind until my pulse steadied into something sharp and determined. The next afternoon, I stopped by an electronics store on my way home from school. It took me 20 minutes to work up the courage to walk inside. I felt ridiculous, nervous, paranoid, but the thought of another night lying awake listening to footsteps outside my door made my stomach churn. After pacing the aisles twice, I finally found a small shelf stocked with compact security cameras and old phone mounts. The newest cameras were sleek, expensive, designed for entire home systems. But tucked in the corner was a small basic model that blended easily with bedroom decor. It was cheap, quiet, unobtrusive. Perfect. I paid in cash. My hands shook as the cashier handed me the bag. When I got home, I slipped the box into my backpack before anyone saw my heartbeat pounding at the slightest sound. If Ryan saw it, everything would fall apart before it even started. I waited until the house was quiet, until I heard my mother laughing lightly with Charles downstairs, and Ryan's door close with a soft click. Only then did I take the camera from my backpack. My fingers trembled as I removed the plastic wrapping, the faint crackle of it sounding much too loud. I positioned the camera on the top shelf of my bookcase wedged between two novels and angled discreetly toward the center of the room. It offered a full view of my bed desk and door. I connected it to my old phone, the one from sophomore year, with the slightly cracked screen and the frayed charging cable. I had kept it as a backup forgotten in the back of a drawer until Nina reminded me it still worked. The phone paired with the camera effortlessly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of power return to me. When everything was set, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the tiny lens peeking out from the books. It felt like my only lifeline in a house full of people determined not to believe me. That night, I climbed into bed and lay awake longer than usual listening. The house breathed around me. Floorboards groaned, pipes hummed. A branch tapped lightly against the roof as the wind picked up. But for once, there were no footsteps in the hallway. The chair pressed against my door remained still. I drifted into a shallow sleep. The next night passed uneventfully as well. No creaking doorknob, no soft whisper sliding under the door, no sudden rush of footsteps. Each morning I checked the footage, and each morning I found nothing but the quiet of an ordinary bedroom. By the third night, I began to wonder if the tension of the past month had gotten to me more than I realized. Maybe Ryan had grown bored. Maybe he was avoiding my room because he sensed my anxiety sharpening toward something. Maybe for once, I was safe. But on the fourth night at exactly 1:47 in the morning, the camera caught something. I did not know it at the time. I slept through the entire incident. It was only when I returned from school the next afternoon and checked the phone that the truth unraveled before me. The footage began like all the others. A quiet room, my blankets rising and falling with my breath, the soft glow of my nightlight casting a warm hue across the floor. Then a shadow moved across the lower corner of the frame. Slowly. Then the door opened. Ryan stepped inside. The sight of him on the screen made my breath hitch. He moved with a practiced ease, eyes scanning the room as though confirming I was asleep. He walked straight to my desk, opened drawers, rifled through papers. He moved to my backpack next, lifting it gently and shaking it just enough to make items slide. Then he opened my wallet. He took $40, folded it twice, slipped it into his pocket. My jaw tightened as I watched him move to my dresser. He pulled open the drawer where I kept personal items and lifted the small notebook where I had logged everything he had done. He skimmed it. He smirked. Then he placed it back slightly out of place. But the worst part was not the theft. It was what came after. Ryan walked to the foot of my bed and stood there, watching me, completely still, for 7 full minutes. The footage recorded every second. My sleeping form unaware of how close he was, how long he stayed. What thoughts twisted in his mind as he stared down at me. When I saw the timestamp, something inside me collapsed. 7 minutes. 7 minutes of silence. 7 minutes of him hovering over me while I slept vulnerable and unprotected. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I watched the video twice, then a third time, each viewing cutting deeper into the fear that anchored itself in my chest. There was no denying it anymore. No twisting the truth. No gaslighting. No explanation my mother or Charles could invent to bury what was on that screen. Ryan was not just invading my space. He was studying me, tracking me, targeting me, and whatever he wanted, whatever he was planning, it was escalating. Proof. I finally had proof. But as I stared at the frozen frame of him standing over my sleeping body, I realized proof alone would not save me. It would only force the truth into the open. And once the truth broke, the illusion my family depended on Ryan would not stay in the shadows. He would step fully into the light. And I knew with a certainty that made my skin crawl that when that happened, everything in that house would explode. I must have watched the footage a dozen times before I could bring myself to breathe normally again. And even then, my hands still trembled, as if my body understood before my mind did, that this evidence would not only expose Ryan, but also destroy whatever illusion of family we had left. I sat on the edge of my bed with the old phone clutched so tightly my knuckles turned white, replaying the moment he stood at the foot of my bed. 7 minutes. 7 unbearable minutes of him staring at me while I slept. The fear in my chest hardened into something else entirely, something closer to resolve. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I had been given something more powerful than their denial. I had proof. My mother and Charles could ignore my words. They could shrug off my bruises, roll their eyes at my concerns, and dismiss every complaint as exaggeration. But they could not erase video footage. They could not twist the truth when it was captured clearly time-stamped undeniable. At least that was what I believed. I decided to confront them after dinner, hoping the timing would give me enough courage and ensure Ryan would be present. I wanted him to see the truth laid bare. I wanted him to know the power he thought he had over me was slipping. My heart pounded against my ribs as I connected the old phone to the living room television. The soft click of the HDMI cable sent a wave of nerves coursing through me. My mother and Charles were settling onto the leather sectional sofa, still half watching the tail end of a news broadcast. Ryan lingered in the hallway, his expression unreadable. When my mother finally noticed the TV screen shifting from the news channel to the mirrored display of my phone, she sighed heavily. "Melissa, what are you doing now? We were about to watch a movie." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. "There is something you both need to see. It is about Ryan." The small pause that followed was thick with tension. Charles's posture stiffened instantly. His jaw tightened the way it always did whenever he believed I was overreacting. "If this is another accusation against my son," he began, his voice sharp, "then we should talk about it calmly instead of theatrics." "Just watch," I said, and pressed play. The room went silent as the footage began. The timestamp appeared first. Then the image of my bedroom lit only by the faint glow from my nightlight. The grainy recording showed my sleeping form under the blankets, breathing steadily. A few seconds later, Ryan entered the room. His figure, unmistakable in the dim light, moved with purpose. He went straight to my desk, rifled through my drawers, opened my wallet, and pocketed the cash. My mother leaned forward slightly, her brows furrowing as the scene continued to unfold. Ryan then approached my dresser, opened the drawer containing my personal items, picked up my notebook, skimmed it, and left it out of place. I watched her expression shift, but not in the way I expected. Instead of fear or shock, a strange confusion crossed her face, as if she were trying to fit what she was seeing into a narrative she already believed. But the moment that followed left no room for reinterpretation. Ryan walked to my bed and stood at the foot of it for 7 long minutes. The footage recorded every second of that unnerving stillness, his body completely frozen, except for the occasional subtle tilt of his head. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Charles stared, his face draining of color. For a moment, nobody spoke, not even Ryan. When the clip ended, the screen returned to the frozen frame of him standing over me. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I waited, breath caught in my throat, expecting disbelief to crumble under the weight of what they had seen. But Charles was the first to speak, and his words pierced the thin film of hope I had built. "This proves absolutely nothing." My heart dropped. "What? He was—" Charles inhaled sharply, forcing composure back into his voice. "He was obviously looking for something you borrowed from him. You probably took something and forgot." I stared at him, stunned. "Borrowed something from him. In my room. At 2 in the morning. And watching me sleep for 7 minutes was him looking for something." Before I could force the words out, my mother added quickly, "Melissa, why would you set up a camera without telling anyone?" Her tone was full of accusation, as though I had violated their privacy instead of the other way around. "You know how invasive this is." I blinked in disbelief. Invasive? I was being watched in my sleep by someone creeping into my room without permission, and they were worried about me invading his privacy. Ryan stepped forward, then his voice dangerously calm. I knocked. "You always play your music loud. I could not hear anything. I bumped into your dresser by accident." He gestured vaguely at the screen, as if it were no more than a recording of a misunderstanding. "And I was checking if you were okay. You have been acting unstable lately." My mother's eyes softened toward him instantly. She nodded at his explanation as if it made sense, as if my evidence somehow supported his story. Charles folded his arms and looked at me with the expression of someone who had already formed his conclusion. "You need to stop this nonsense, Melissa. Filming people while they sleep, accusing Ryan of things he clearly did not do. This is manipulative." My pulse roared in my ears. I felt nauseous. They were twisting the truth right in front of the evidence. "Are you serious?" I managed to choke out. "Did you watch the same video I did?" He was standing over me, watching me, for 7 minutes. That was not concern. That was not checking if I was okay. That was stalking. Charles slammed his hand against the arm of the sofa, startling me. Enough. I will not tolerate another minute of this. Hand over the camera. No more surveillance in this house. I stepped back instinctively, clutching the phone to my chest. It was the only proof I had. Ryan met my gaze then, and the satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. He had known. He had counted on this. My mother walked toward me with her hand outstretched as if I were a child refusing to hand over a forbidden toy. Melissa, give it to us. We will handle this privately. Privately. Meaning quietly. Meaning without consequence. Meaning buried. I shook my head, whispering a trembling no before hurrying past them, rushing up the stairs to the only place in that house where I could think. As I shut my bedroom door and pressed my back against it, my phone buzzed. A message from Nina. Did you show them? Are you okay? I stared at the glowing screen as my vision blurred with tears I had held back for too long. I typed 4 words with shaking hands. They did not believe me. The night I showed them the video was the night something inside me finally broke. But what I did not realize was that the footage, as terrifying as it was only the surface of something far darker. What Ryan had done in my room was not random, nor was it simply about invading my privacy or exerting control. It was part of a pattern, a carefully constructed cycle, rooted in desperation entitlement, and something far more dangerous than jealousy or petty cruelty. It took only 48 hours for the truth to begin unraveling, and once the first thread loosened, everything else collapsed with it. The morning after the confrontation, I skipped breakfast entirely. I could not bear to sit across from any of them pretending the night before had not happened. I stayed in my room with the door locked, scrolling through messages from Nina while replaying the footage again and again in my mind. My mother banged on the door once, telling me I needed to come downstairs and apologize for causing chaos, but I ignored her. Charles tried next, his tone cold and authoritative, telling me to stop this behavior before it went too far. I blocked out their voices and waited until the house finally emptied, listening to the muffled slam of the front door as they left for errands. I needed air, safety, space to think. So I headed to Nina's apartment, clutching my backpack like it was the last anchor holding me steady. The moment she opened the door, she pulled me inside with a hug that nearly knocked the breath out of me. I showed her the footage. All of it. She watched it in horrified silence, her hand clapped over her mouth. When the video ended, she sat back slowly, her face pale. Melissa, this is not just weird behavior. This is escalation. And escalation, like this, is never about one thing. There is always a root. Something he is hiding. Something he does not want anyone to find. Those words clung to me long after I left her apartment. They echoed in my mind later that evening when I checked my email and noticed a new unread message from an unknown financial institution. Confused, I clicked on it expecting spam. But it was not spam. It was a payment reminder for a credit card balance I had never seen before. The message said I owed $300 with a minimum payment due in 5 days. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Identity theft, maybe. I tried logging into the account using the temporary password included in the email, fully expecting it to deny me access, but it did not. The screen loaded immediately. The account was in my name, my social security number, my address, my phone number. Everything about the account was tied to me. I stared at the screen frozen. Someone had opened a credit card using my identity, and I had a sickening suspicion of who that someone was. I immediately called the credit card company and asked for information on when the account had been opened. The representative said it had been created 3 months earlier with digital authorization and identity verification based on documents submitted through an online portal. My throat tightened. Documents! Identity verification. That meant someone had used my personal information. I thought back to the notebook in my drawer being disturbed, the papers in my backpack shuffled, the nights Ryan had slipped into my room when I was asleep. My social security card was in the very drawer he had opened. My passport, too. I hung up before the representative could finish asking follow-up questions. My hands shook uncontrollably as I opened the account's transaction history. The list of purchases made my blood run cold. Multiple payments to online gambling sites, increments of $50, then $80, then $100, a handful of purchases at electronics stores, food delivery charges, subscription services for gaming platforms. It totaled nearly $1,000. My name sat beside each transaction condemned by someone else's actions. I felt sick. I scrolled down and noticed something even more disturbing. Several payments to a digital wallet account registered under initials I recognized immediately. R.P. Ryan Patterson. Everything in me went cold. The missing money, the mysterious gaming charges, the way he had smirked when bank statements disappeared, the new headphones, the night subscriptions I had never signed up for. He was not invading my room because he was bored or curious or malicious for the sake of cruelty. He was invading it because he needed something, money, and he needed a way to get more of it without being traced. He had found the perfect solution: my identity. He had stolen it so thoroughly that the digital world believed I was the one racking up debt. I dug deeper. With Nina's help that night, we tracked the digital wallet account using the partial information shown in the transaction logs. She worked quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, she found a marketplace account linked to the same username. The account had transaction listings for used electronics, including items that looked uncomfortably familiar. A silver bracelet I had lost 2 months ago, a nearly new pair of headphones, a portable gaming console that had gone missing from the living room. My bracelet had been sold for $80. The gaming console for $150. The listing photos showed a hand holding the items, a hand with a small scar across the knuckle. Ryan's hand. I felt the room tilt as the realization pressed down on me. He had been selling things online for months. Items that went missing around the house. Items that belonged to me. Items he could steal, pawn, and profit from without my mother or Charles suspecting a thing. But the deeper problem was unmistakable. He was drowning financially, and instead of getting help or admitting it, he had turned me into his safety net, his personal ATM, his invisible bank account. Nina leaned back, exhaling slowly. This is not just stealing. This is identity fraud. This is criminal. You need to take this to someone. Not your mom, not Charles, someone who will actually believe you. But I was still naive enough at the time to try one more time with my family. When I arrived home that evening, the house was quiet. My mother sat at the dining table scanning through mail while Charles watched television. I placed the printed statements in front of them, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Someone opened a credit card in my name. Someone has been using my social security number. They frowned, then asked if I was sure I had not done it myself. I told them I had proof. I showed them the marketplace listings, the transactions, the gambling payments linked to someone with Ryan's initials. But instead of shock or concern, my mother's expression turned defensive. She insisted I was misunderstanding the data. She claimed identity theft was complicated and maybe I had been sloppy with my information. She even suggested that Ryan might have been framed by someone else online. When I showed her the picture of his scarred knuckle holding my bracelet, she hesitated only long enough for her denial to catch up. She said it might not be his hand. Charles accused me of manipulating screenshots. The anger rising inside me was so sharp it made my voice shake. Why is it so impossible for you to believe that he is doing this? Why do you always defend him? They did not answer. Instead, Ryan stepped into the doorway, hands in his pockets, and said in that calm, infuriating voice that perhaps I should stop making things up because stress could cause memory lapses. Memory lapses. My mother nodded. Charles muttered something about my emotional instability. It was then, as Ryan stood there smirking behind them, that the full truth hit me. They would never, ever believe me, not because they could not, but because believing me meant facing a reality they were too afraid to acknowledge. Their perfect family was a lie built on Ryan's deceit, and I had become the casualty they were willing to sacrifice to preserve the illusion. When Ryan leaned in slightly and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "If you keep pushing, you are going to regret it," I felt something in me snap. This was no longer about theft, or lies, or manipulation. This was about survival. December 23rd arrived with the kind of bitter cold that seeped into the walls and settled into my bones, but the chill outside was nothing compared to the icy heaviness inside our house. I spent most of the day in my room scrolling through the evidence again and again, as if repetition would somehow make it undeniable to everyone else. My emails, the gambling transactions, my missing items sold online, the stolen documents, the marketplace listings showing Ryan's scarred knuckle in the photos. Every piece confirmed the truth, and yet the more evidence I collected, the more determined my family seemed to be in protecting him. By evening, my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I came downstairs clutching a folder filled with printed statements I had organized with Nina's help. I found my mother in the kitchen preparing dinner, her motions slow and methodical, humming a Christmas tune under her breath as if nothing in our world was falling apart. I cleared my throat. "Mom, we need to talk." She tensed slightly, though she kept her back turned, her hand hovering over a pot of simmering soup. "If this is about last night, Melissa, I do not want to revisit it." My voice cracked as I forced the words out. "Someone opened a credit card using my identity, my social security number." My mother finally turned to look at me, her face a fragile mask of concern that felt painfully rehearsed. She asked me to slow down, then asked if I might have filled something out online without remembering. I shook my head, opening the folder and pulling out the printed emails, showing her the timestamps, the charges, the digital receipts. She skimmed them with growing confusion, her lips moving silently as she read. When she reached the transaction list showing gambling payments, she paused long enough for a flicker of alarm to appear in her eyes. But before that alarm could take root, she exhaled sharply and handed the papers back to me. "Melissa, online fraud happens all the time. There are people who steal information from databases. This does not mean your stepbrother is involved." I could not believe what I was hearing. It was like watching a person choose blindness. I told her about the marketplace listings. I showed her the bracelet I had lost weeks ago, now captured in a photo held by a hand bearing Ryan's distinctive scar. My mother stared at the picture for a long moment, her breathing growing shallow. Then she looked up with a thin, wavering smile and said, "Maybe the seller had a similar scar." Similar scar. I felt something inside me twist painfully. Before I could argue, Charles walked into the kitchen, fresh from a shower, smelling of aftershave. My mother handed the papers to him with a worried sigh. He read them quickly, then looked at me with growing irritation. "Melissa, these look edited." He flipped one of the pages, pointing at the printed screenshot. "Anyone can fake these. If you are trying to frame Ryan, it is not going to work." My jaw dropped. I am not framing him. He has been stealing from me for months. He has been using my identity. I tried to show him the bank statement again, but he thrust it back into my hands. His voice rose. "Enough. You will not accuse my son of this." I took a shaky breath. "Look at the timestamps. The transactions line up with the nights I heard him in my room." He shoved his hands into his pockets, his eyes narrowing. "So now you are keeping track of when you imagine him walking around. You need help, not drama." My mother touched his arm gently as if soothing a restless animal. "Honey, she is under stress. School. Holidays. Maybe she is overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. The word stabbed deeper than any knife. I felt my chest burn with fury and desperation. Overwhelmed does not open credit cards. Overwhelmed does not sell my jewelry. Overwhelmed does not gamble away hundreds of dollars using my name. Charles stepped forward and jabbed a finger toward me. "You need to stop, right now, before you ruin this family." The air in the room tightened thick and suffocating. I realized they were not trying to understand. They were trying to silence me. I turned to walk away, but Ryan was standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, arms crossed. His eyes glinted with triumph as he watched the three of us. He had been listening the entire time. I felt bile rise in my throat. He smiled lazily. "You are still talking about this." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm and held up the folder, pointing to the documents. Why do the gambling payments lead to your digital wallet? Why does the marketplace account selling my bracelet show your scar? Why do the charges appear on nights you were in my room? He shrugged, his expression bored. I do not know. Maybe you are mixing things up. Maybe someone is messing with both of us. My laugh came out choked and hollow. Messing with both of us! He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only I could hear. If you talk again, you will regret it. The words slithered into my ears like poison. My breath caught in my throat. My mother, watching Ryan's calm posture and hearing nothing but the gentleness he used in her presence, immediately placed herself between us. Melissa, stop provoking him. He is trying to help. Help! He was threatening me in plain sight, and she still defended him. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I reached for the counter to steady myself. Charles took the folder from my hands and tossed it onto the table. Enough of this. Not another word until you get your head straight. My mother nodded, a forced calmness settling over her face. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. This family needs peace. Not accusations, not drama. Peace. The irony was suffocating. Ryan leaned back against the doorway again, his smirk widening into something darker, something triumphant. He whispered one more sentence under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. They will never believe you. I thought the words would crush me. I thought the truth being dismissed again would shatter whatever strength I had left. But instead, something inside me hardened. Something quiet. Something cold. Something that understood this was no longer a matter of convincing them. This was a matter of surviving them. I turned away from all three of them climbing the stairs without looking back. I closed my bedroom door and pressed my forehead against the wood, shaking. They had buried the truth one more time. They had chosen him. Again. And as I slid to the floor, gasping for breath, one realization cut through the drowning noise inside me. If they were willing to ignore this much, if they were willing to protect him at any cost, then whatever Ryan was planning next would be far worse than anything he had done already. I was not wrong. The next night at 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve, Ryan proved exactly how far he was willing to go. The house was wrapped in the kind of silence that only arrives on Christmas Eve, a heavy, suffocating quiet that felt almost unnatural. The lights from the tree downstairs cast shifting patterns along the hallway walls, their soft glow flickering like warning signals I failed to read in time. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion clawing at my bones. My mind replayed the horror of the night before on an endless loop, each denial from my mother and Charles cutting deeper than the last. I checked my phone. 1:50. 10 minutes until 2 a.m, the hour when the house always felt darkest. I tried to slow my breathing, but anxiety crept beneath my skin with electric precision. Every small creak of the house made me flinch. Every gust of wind outside made my heart stutter. I told myself I was safe as long as I stayed in my room, as long as I stayed quiet. I told myself I was imagining the soft sound coming from downstairs. The faint click of a cabinet door, the whisper of something metallic shifting. But my body knew before my mind admitted it. Someone was awake. Someone was moving. I sat up slowly, straining my ears. The house remained still for a moment, so still that I began to question my senses. Then I heard it again, the unmistakable slide of a kitchen drawer. My pulse spiked violently. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, feet pressing into the cold hardwood floor. I held my breath. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate climbing the stairs one at a time. One step. Pause. Second step. Pause. A rhythm too intentional to be anyone else. My throat tightened. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall just as the shadow appeared beneath the door frame. Ryan's shadow. I could recognize the shape anywhere. It lingered unmoving at first, as if he were enjoying the anticipation. Then the doorknob turned, softly, slowly. The door opened with an agonizing creak, revealing Ryan standing in the hallway, the dim Christmas lights casting fractured shadows across his face. His expression was flat empty, almost peaceful. But what he held in his hand turned my blood to ice. A kitchen knife. Its blade glinted faintly beneath the soft glow from downstairs, catching the light like a silent promise. My voice barely escaped my throat. "Ryan, what are you doing?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that sounded final, like sealing a tomb. "You should have kept your mouth shut." His voice was calm, almost conversational, but the hatred simmering beneath it was unmistakable. "They will never believe you, no matter what you say." He walked toward me slowly, each footstep measured with chilling control, the knife dangling loosely from his fingers. I felt the world narrow to a single point of focus. The blade, the distance between us, the inevitability in his eyes. I backed into the corner, hands raised instinctively. "Ryan, please, we can talk about this." He tilted his head slightly, his smile bone-chilling. "Talking is what got us here, Melissa. You should have stopped. You should have let me handle things." His calmness was more terrifying than anger. It was the calm of someone who had already justified what he was about to do, someone who believed he was untouchable. I tried to dart around him, but he moved faster than I expected. The knife flashed. A burning shock ripped through my left side as the blade plunged into my flesh. The pain was instant, white-hot, searing through every nerve like liquid fire. A violent gasp tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, clutching my side as warmth spilled beneath my fingers. Warmth that should never have been outside my body. Ryan stepped back a few inches, chest rising and falling quickly, eyes wide now, with something between panic and triumph. "I told you," he whispered. "You should have stayed quiet." I crashed into the dresser and used it to steady myself. My legs trembled as I tried to run. I did not recognize my own voice when I screamed. It came out hoarse, broken, cracking through the stillness of the house like glass shattering. Ryan lunged again, but adrenaline surged through me like a lifeline. I dodged past him, slamming shoulder first into the door and bursting into the hallway. The world tilted. Spots clouded my vision. Blood ran warm beneath my shirt. I stumbled toward the staircase, gripping the railing with slippery fingers as I dragged myself downward. Lights from the Christmas tree blurred in my vision, their colors blending into streaks of red and green. My foot slipped. I crashed onto the last step, my body hitting the hardwood floor so hard it knocked the breath out of me. From above, Ryan's voice floated down like a cold wind. "No one will believe you. No one ever has." My hands shook violently as I crawled toward the living room, leaving a faint smear on the polished wood. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me. The pain radiated deeper now, spreading through my abdomen like a wildfire I could not outrun. The sound of footsteps thundered behind me, but they were not Ryan's. My mother's voice shrieked from the top of the stairs, panicked but not in the way I needed. "What is going on down here? Melissa, what are you doing?" I collapsed beside the coffee table, my cheek pressing into the cool surface of the floor as I turned my head toward her and Charles, who stood behind her in his robe, rubbing sleep from his eyes like this was all an inconvenience. "Help me," I choked out. "Ryan, he stabbed me." My mother stared at me, then at the blood on my hands, and for a moment I thought she would finally believe me, finally see the truth. But then she laughed. A dry, incredulous laugh tinted with disbelief and irritation rather than fear. "Melissa, not this again. You cannot keep doing this." Charles stepped forward, his face tightening with annoyance. "Get up. This is ridiculous. You are ruining Christmas Eve." I felt my heart splinter. I could not breathe. I could not process the cruelty of their denial as blood seeped through my fingers and pain tore through my ribs. Ryan appeared at the top of the stairs behind them, breathing heavily, but wearing a mask of innocence so perfect it made me sick. He whispered almost tenderly, "I think she slipped. She fell on something." My mother nodded quickly, refusing to turn around to look at him. She grabbed Charles's arm. "Call her an ambulance." Maybe she fainted. Maybe she hurt herself trying to get attention. Attention. I was bleeding out on the floor, drowning in pain that made the world spin, and they thought I wanted attention. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a weak sound escaped. The lights from the tree blurred again, melting into soft halos as the edges of my vision darkened. The last thing I saw was the reflection of the Christmas lights flickering against the polished floor as my consciousness slipped away. The last thing I heard was my mother's voice, distant and shaking. She has to stop this. She has to. Then everything went black, and as the darkness swallowed me whole, a single thought echoed through my fading mind. In this house, the truth had never mattered, only the illusion. The first thing I became aware of was the beeping. Soft, steady, rhythmic, like a mechanical heartbeat, trying to pull me back into a world I was not sure I wanted to return to. Then came the smell of antiseptic, sharp and sterile, cutting through the fog of unconsciousness. My eyelids felt heavy, glued shut with exhaustion, but the weight of reality pressed on me until I forced them open. Blurry white lights came into focus above me, and for a moment I could not remember where I was or how I had gotten there. Then the pain surged like a tidal wave crashing through my side, ripping a groan from my throat. I gasped, instinctively clutching my abdomen, but my hand met thick bandages and medical tape instead of open skin. "You are safe," a calm male voice said from somewhere to my left. "You are in the emergency department at Clearwater Memorial. Just breathe." My vision cleared enough to make out a man in a navy jacket with a badge clipped to it. Dark hair, graying at the temples, tired but intelligent eyes watching me with patient intensity. Detective Grant Alvarez. My throat tightened. Memories slammed back into place like a film reel, snapping violently into motion. The hallway. The knife. My mother's disbelief. Ryan's whisper. The blood on my hands. I tried to sit up abruptly, panic clawing its way up my spine, but the detective gently pressed a hand to my shoulder. "Do not move too fast. You are stable, but you lost a considerable amount of blood. The doctors stitched the wound and you are on pain meds, but you need to stay still." His words blurred as adrenaline surged. "Ryan, where is he? Did they arrest him?" The detective's expression hardened in the slightest a controlled shift that told me he had been waiting for that question. "We are looking into everyone's statements right now. I will walk you through everything, but I need you to answer a few questions first." I stared at him, chest tightening. My voice came out hoarse, shaky. "He stabbed me. My stepbrother stabbed me." "I know what happened," he replied softly, "but I need to hear it from you in your own words. Start at the beginning. Take your time." I inhaled slowly, the effort sending a sharp jolt of pain through my abdomen. Then I told him everything. From the missing money to the identity theft to the late-night intrusions to the confrontation on the 23rd. I told him about the marketplace listings, the digital wallet, the threats, the way Ryan whispered warnings, as if they were secrets meant only for us. When I described the moment he plunged the knife into my side, Detective Alvarez's jaw clenched, but he did not interrupt. He wrote notes in a small leather-bound notebook, nodding slowly as each piece of the puzzle settled into place. When I finished, tears stung my eyes. I wiped them with the back of my hand, breath trembling. "They still do not believe me," I whispered. "Even when I was on the floor bleeding, they thought I did it to myself." This time, the detective did not hide his reaction. His eyes darkened with anger, not at me, but at the situation. "Your mother and stepfather are claiming you injured yourself and that Ryan was trying to help you." He paused for a long moment before adding, "And your mother laughed when paramedics questioned her." The words hit me like a blow. I turned my face away, biting my lip so hard I tasted blood. Of course she did. Of course she laughed. Denial was easier than responsibility. Alvarez continued, "Ryan claims you slipped and fell onto something sharp. He also says you accused him because you resent him." My head snapped back toward him. "Fell onto something." His voice softened. "I know, Melissa. The story does not match your wound, and the video your friend mentioned is being processed by our tech team right now." My heart stuttered. "They took it. The camera. The footage." "Yes. We collected your recording devices and your laptop. We also photographed the scene at the house." His gaze met mine fully. "Your injury is not consistent with a fall. The angle, the depth, everything points to an offensive wound, not an accident." Relief washed over me so suddenly my vision blurred again. Someone believed me. Someone finally believed me. The detective pulled a chair closer. "I have a few more questions. Has Ryan ever threatened you verbally before tonight?" "Not directly," I whispered. "But he always implied things, whispered warnings, moved things in my room. He wanted me scared. He wanted control." Alvarez wrote that down, then asked, "And your parents, have they ever threatened you?" I shook my head slowly. "Not with violence, not physically, but they defend him no matter what. They made me feel crazy. They made me question everything I saw. They made him untouchable." Alvarez closed his notebook. "Gaslighting, manipulation. It is not illegal, but it paints a very clear pattern." There was a soft knock at the door before a nurse stepped in to check my IV. When she left, someone else entered. A woman in her 40s with a sharp ponytail and warm brown eyes that scanned the room quickly before landing on me. Her badge read Detective A. Chen. She nodded respectfully. "Melissa, I am Detective Chen. I have been interviewing neighbors and gathering statements. We are working closely with Detective Alvarez on your case." I swallowed hard. "What? What did they say?" She exchanged a glance with Alvarez before answering. "A few neighbors reported seeing your stepbrother carrying bags to his car late at night over the past several weeks. One said he thought Ryan was selling something out of his trunk." My pulse accelerated. Chen continued. "We also checked your stepbrother's school locker. We found bottles of prescription medication and several items reported stolen by other students. My breath caught. My medication was missing too. And he—" I could not finish the sentence. The detectives already knew. They had known the moment they opened the locker. Detective Chen crouched slightly so her eyes met mine. "This is important, Melissa. We found your sleep medication bottle in Ryan's locker with several pills missing." My chest tightened painfully. The room felt too small, too bright, too real. Then Alvarez's voice broke through the storm. "We also recovered the knife from your house's outdoor trash bin. Your stepbrother's fingerprints are on the handle." The air left my lungs in a single trembling exhale. My grip on the blanket loosened. After months of being dismissed, doubted, belittled, the truth had emerged with more force than I could have predicted. They had evidence, real, irrefutable evidence. Detective Chen stood again. "The district attorney has been contacted. Charges are being prepared. Ryan is currently being detained for questioning at the station." I blinked slowly, trying to absorb the words. "And my parents." Alvarez's expression hardened again. "They are insisting that Ryan is innocent and that you are lying to get attention. They say you have a history of emotional instability. They laughed when we updated them on the severity of the wound." My throat ached. A part of me had expected nothing less, yet hearing it out loud fractured something deep inside me. Chen continued. "Their reactions have been noted and added to the report. For the first time in months, I did not feel alone. The pain in my side throbbed sharp but distant beneath the morphine. The detectives stayed a while longer asking for details about anything I remembered, exact wording, exact actions, exact timing. I answered everything, voice soft but unwavering. After they left the room, grew quiet again, the beeping of the monitor filling the silence. I stared at the ceiling, letting the truth settle into my bones. They finally saw him for who he was. They finally believed me. And for the first time, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Weak, trembling, but alive. This was not the end. It was the beginning of justice. The next 48 hours unfolded with a clarity so sharp it felt almost surreal, as if the universe had finally stopped turning its back on me and instead cast a harsh, undeniable spotlight on everything Ryan had done. Lying in the hospital bed, drifting in and out of medicated sleep, I kept expecting the world to tilt again for someone to burst in and tell me there had been a mistake, that the evidence was inconclusive, that my parents had managed to twist the story back in his favor. But the truth had gained momentum, and for once, it refused to be buried. Late the following morning, Detective Alvarez returned to my hospital room with a thick stack of printed reports under his arm and Detective Chen trailing behind him carrying a laptop. There was something different in their demeanor when they walked in. Determination, yes, but also a sense of inevitability, as if the pieces of the puzzle had finally clicked into place. Melissa Alvarez said gently as he pulled up a chair, "We have more information for you." "A lot more." My pulse quickened. Chin set the laptop on the rolling table and opened it, revealing a paused video clip. I recognized the angle instantly. My bedroom, the camera I had hidden. My chest tightened. We were able to recover and decrypt multiple recordings, she explained. Some had corrupted frames, but most were intact. She clicked play. The footage showed Ryan entering my room 3 nights before the attack, moving with predatory calmness, opening my backpack, flipping through my wallet. My breath hitched when I saw him count the bills inside pocket several, then open my journal and flip through the pages with a smirk. The clip continued. He stood at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep for an agonizing 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It felt worse watching it now than it did the night I first discovered it. Chin paused the video. "This is only one of 7 recordings," she said quietly. Each clip showed similar behavior, rifling through drawers, opening my laptop, taking photos of documents, standing over me in the dark. I could not look away. Every second confirmed what I had known all along. He had been escalating. He had been stalking me. He had been planning something, and no one had believed me. Alvarez slid a folder across the blanket. "In addition to the video evidence, we have the forensic report from the crime lab." He waited until I opened it. Inside were photos of the knife recovered from our outdoor trash bin. The handle was dusted with fingerprint powder, revealing clear patterns that matched Ryan's prints. "We also found partial smudges from you near the blade, which is consistent with your attempt to grab it during the attack." My stomach twisted. "They know," I whispered. "They know it was him." "They do," Alvarez confirmed, "and that is not all." He handed me another set of documents. These were financial reports, credit card statements, transaction logs. They matched the screenshots I had shown my mother, but now they were official, verified, unquestionable. "We subpoenaed the records for the credit card opened under your name," he explained. "The application was completed on a device associated with your stepbrother's IP address. Additionally, his browsing history shows research on identity theft methods and gambling platforms." My head tilted back against the pillow. The last pieces were falling into place. Chin clicked to another window on her laptop. An image appeared taken from a neighbor's security camera across the street. Though grainy, it clearly showed Ryan carrying a large black trash bag to his car late at night. "We already confirmed the contents of the bag once we identified a matching item in his locker," Chin said. "That evening he sold 2 of your belongings at a local pawn shop." She shifted to another image photos from Ryan's school locker. Inside were bottles of prescription medication, including my sleep pills, and several items labeled stolen by other students. He had been taking things from people for months. I stared at the screen, the weight of everything settling over me like snow on a collapsing tree branch. It was too much. Yet it was exactly what I needed. Alvarez rested his elbows on his knees. "Melissa, the evidence shows a clear pattern of stalking you, stealing from you, using your identity for financial gain, and ultimately attacking you when he realized you were close to exposing him fully." My throat felt tight. My hands trembled. He continued. "His story about you injuring yourself does not hold up. The medical analysis shows your wound was delivered from above and at an angle impossible to self-inflict. Additionally, your blood pattern near the stairs indicates you were moving away from your attacker." My chest rose and fell in shaky breaths, part fear, part relief, part devastation. Chin added, "Because the financial fraud connects directly to him, the district attorney is escalating this case. Assault with a deadly weapon, identity theft, fraud, stalking, burglary, several counts of theft, each charge layered over the previous one until the stack felt towering." "And my parents," I whispered, bracing myself for the answer. Alvarez sighed. "They are being investigated for obstruction of justice. Their refusal to cooperate, their attempt to blame you and their behavior during our questioning raised several red flags." My stomach twisted painfully, a mix of anger, grief, and something like closure. Chin closed the laptop gently. "This is no longer a matter of he said, she said. The evidence is overwhelming, Melissa, and it all points to a very calculated pattern of abuse that you were subjected to." Abuse. The word rang through my mind like a church bell. I had never dared label it that way, not even privately. But hearing it spoken aloud made everything inside me realign. The missing money, the denial, the late-night footsteps, the invasion of my room, the financial fraud, the manipulation, the threats, the knife, abuse. The door opened quietly and Nina slipped inside. When she saw the detectives, she froze, then stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" I nodded, a shaky smile forming despite everything. "They believe me. They believe all of it." Nina's eyes filled with tears. Finally. She squeezed my hand gently, grounding me back in the present. The detectives stood to leave. Before they exited, Alvarez paused at the doorway. "Melissa, I want you to know something. Cases like this, many victims never get believed, but you documented everything. You reached out for help. You survived." His voice softened. "And now, the truth is unfolding exactly the way it should." After they left, Nina pulled up a chair and sat beside me. For the first time in months, my chest loosened enough for me to breathe without pain. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It belonged to the evidence, to the investigators, to the justice system. The truth had finally found its voice, and so had I. Ryan was arrested on the afternoon of December 26th, but the moment played out in a way nothing could have prepared me for. I had imagined something dramatic, something loud or chaotic, with neighbors peeking through curtains and officers shouting commands. Instead, the scene was strangely quiet when Detective Alvarez later described it to me as silence that carried more weight than noise ever could. He told me Ryan had been sitting in the living room lounging on the couch in sweatpants, eating cereal as if the world outside his bubble did not exist. My mother was folding laundry at the dining table, and Charles was reading the newspaper, blissfully unaware that their facade was seconds away from shattering. When the officers knocked, no one even looked concerned. My mother actually smiled, thinking someone had come with a delivery she forgot she ordered. Charles opened the door with his usual air of superiority, but the moment he saw the badges, his entire face shifted, tightening with suspicion and irritation. The officers asked for Ryan Patterson. My mother froze her hands, still gripping a half-folded sweater. Ryan looked up from his cereal spoon suspended near his mouth, baffled by the sudden change in atmosphere. The officers stepped inside, their voices steady and unmistakably firm. "Ryan Patterson, you are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, identity theft, financial fraud, burglary, and multiple counts of theft. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney." My mother let out a noise that was neither a gasp nor a scream, but something strangled and broken between the two. She rushed forward, shouting that there had to be a mistake, that Ryan was a good boy, that he had done nothing wrong. Charles immediately demanded a supervisor, insisting the detectives must have been misled by a hysterical teenager. But the officers did not flinch. They told my parents the charges were based on forensic evidence, financial records, digital logs, video files, and physical fingerprints. It was Ryan's turn to freeze. He stared at them, mouth open, utterly blindsided because for the first time in his life, consequences had caught up to him faster than he could rewrite the narrative. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he snapped back into himself with a fury that made even the officers stiffen. "This is her fault. That psycho made everything up." He thrashed once, but the officers tightened their grip. He fought against their hold, shouting louder. "She ruined my life. She planned this. You are all idiots if you believe her." My mother ran after them as they escorted him outside. She kept screaming that they were arresting the wrong child, that I had always been unstable, that I was jealous, vindictive, manipulative. Charles followed close behind, yelling at the officers, claiming I had a history of emotional outbursts and needed mental help. Their desperation was almost pathetic. Almost, but none of their theatrics mattered. The officers did not waver. They did not soften. Ryan was placed in the back of the patrol car, still shouting threats through the window like a trapped animal. Alvarez and Chin told me everything when they visited the hospital the next morning. They also recorded my parents' behavior at the time of arrest, documenting their interference and their refusal to acknowledge the mountains of evidence. When my mother tried to stop the officers from reading Ryan his rights, they warned her she would be charged with obstruction if she did not move aside. Charles threatened to sue the entire department, but the officers ignored him. It was only when the patrol car finally drove away that the house fell completely silent the way a room does after a storm destroys everything inside. My mother collapsed into a chair, shaking, whispering over and over again that this could not be happening. Charles paced like a caged animal, muttering that they needed to get a lawyer immediately, that the detectives were incompetent, that I had set them all up. But no amount of denial could change the reality. The truth had finally exploded through the walls of their delusion. Their golden boy had shattered the perfect image they had forced the world to see. Later that evening, they tried to visit the hospital, but the nurses blocked them at the front desk. I was listed as a high-risk patient due to the nature of the assault, and only approved visitors were allowed near me. Nina had given her name. My therapist had given hers. My parents' names were not on the list. The nurse told me they tried to argue, insisting they had a right to see me, that I needed them, that they needed to explain the misunderstanding. But hospital security escorted them out when Charles raised his voice at staff, shouting that they were enabling me, enabling lies, enabling the destruction of his home. I did not feel guilty, not even for a second. I knew what guilt felt like. I had carried it for years. This was not guilt. This was clarity. The next morning, I received a voicemail from my mother. I debated deleting it without listening, but curiosity won. Her voice trembled, cracking with panic and disbelief. "Melissa, you have to fix this. They are treating Ryan like a criminal. You need to tell them the truth. You need to come home. We can talk. We can figure it out. Please, sweetie, please." A second voicemail came hours later from Charles, angrier. "I hope you understand what you have done. You destroyed this family. You put your mother through hell. You are going to regret every bit of this when the truth comes out." I did not respond. I saved the voicemails instead. Evidence. The detectives told me that among all the reactions they observed during this case, my parents' behavior stood out the most. Their insistence on my guilt, their refusal to acknowledge Ryan's actions, their willingness to dismiss my bleeding body as a plea for attention. It spoke volumes, more than they ever intended. The district attorney took great interest in their behavior, especially the laughter my mother uttered the night I nearly died and the aggression Charles used with law enforcement. Their obstruction charges were inevitable. 2 days later, I learned that both of them had been officially charged. 18 months of supervised probation. Lifetime restrictions on contact with me unless I initiated it. Mandatory parenting classes. Community service. And full financial responsibility for every bill, every medication, every therapy session I would need to recover from the trauma their negligence allowed. When Alvarez finished reading the list of penalties aloud, he asked gently, "How do you feel?" I searched for the answer. It came as a whisper, like justice is finally catching up, like the world is finally seeing, like I am not alone anymore. Outside the window, the winter sky hung gray and still, but for the first time, it did not feel heavy. It felt like the beginning of something I had never really known before. Safety. And maybe even freedom. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the morning of January 8th, a date that had burned itself into my mind long before it arrived. Even as I recovered slowly in the guest room of Nina's family home, surrounded by warmth and safety, I had not felt in years. The upcoming court appearance lingered like a shadow behind every quiet moment. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying the events that brought me to this point, each memory unraveling with sharper clarity the closer the hearing crept. Some mornings I woke drenched in sweat, clutching my bandaged side, convinced I was back on the living room floor, bleeding while my mother laughed. Other mornings I woke numb, mechanical, feeling nothing at all. But January 8th came anyway. The world did not pause for my healing. Recovery moved at its own pace, but court dates did not wait for emotional readiness. By the time Nina drove me to the Jefferson County Courthouse, my hands trembled so badly that I kept them tucked under the sleeves of my coat. The courthouse loomed ahead, all cold marble columns and reflective windows that made the sky look stormier than it was. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and polished wood, a scent that somehow carried the weight of thousands of stories told before mine. Nina held my hand as we walked down the hall. She whispered reminders that I was safe, that the evidence was irrefutable, that everything I had endured would finally be acknowledged. But her reassurance could not completely quiet the storm in my chest. My heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The waiting area outside Courtroom B was crowded with lawyers shuffling through files, families huddled together in tense whispers, and officers standing watch. And then I saw them. My mother and Charles sat on a bench near the wall, stiff and cold. My mother wore her navy church dress, the same one she wore for Christmas services every year, but today it made her look smaller, somehow swallowed by grief or denial, or both. Charles sat beside her in his only suit, jaw clenched so tight a muscle near his temple twitched repeatedly. They looked older, battered by the weight of the truth they refused to accept. When my mother's eyes found mine, she did not soften. She did not cry. She did not look ashamed. Instead, her face hardened into something sharp, almost accusatory, as if I were the one sitting there charged with crimes. Charles looked at me with pure bitterness, a glare carved from deep resentment. Nina squeezed my hand more tightly and guided me down the opposite side of the hall, keeping her body angled protectively between me and them. "Melissa," she whispered, "do not look at them. Look ahead. Look at where you are going, not where you came from." The courtroom doors opened and a bailiff called our case. My knees weakened, but I forced myself to straighten. I walked into the room with small, careful steps, each one reminding me of the survival instinct that had carried me this far. The courtroom was larger than I imagined. Rows of benches stretched back toward the double doors. Wooden panels lined the walls, and a massive seal behind the judge's seat commanded the entire room. The air buzzed faintly with murmurs and shifting papers. At the defendant's table sat Ryan, wearing a juvenile detention uniform that seemed too big for him. His hair was unkempt, his face pale, no longer the smug, calculating presence that had haunted my bedroom doorway. But when he turned and saw me walk in, something dark lit his eyes. Not fear, not remorse. Hatred. He mouthed something I could not fully make out, but I recognized the shape of the words. "You will pay." Detective Alvarez must have seen it too, because he immediately stepped into my line of sight, blocking Ryan from view. He nodded once, silently, reassuring me that the threat had been noted. Ryan's attorney, a sharply dressed public defender named Michael Castellano, sat beside him, organizing a pile of documents. Castellano radiated a kind of rehearsed confidence that told me he had walked this path many times before. He glanced at me briefly with a neutral expression, neither sympathetic nor hostile, but entirely focused on the performance ahead. I took my seat beside the prosecutor assistant district attorney Janet Morrison. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes that held the kind of intelligence and experience that could dismantle entire stories with a single sentence. She greeted me with a warm but firm nod. "You are safe, Melissa. I will guide you through everything." Judge Evelyn March entered the courtroom with the authority of someone who had spent decades cutting through lies. Everyone rose. She scanned the room, her gaze pausing briefly on Ryan before shifting to me, her expression unreadable but not unkind. When she spoke, her voice carried the steady weight of experience. "This court is now in session for the preliminary hearing in the case of the state of Michigan versus Ryan Patterson." The bailiff read through the charges: assault with a deadly weapon, identity theft, fraud, stalking, theft of personal property, burglary. Each one hit me like a blow, but this time it was not fear that struck. It was validation. The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Ms. Morrison, proceed." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state intends to demonstrate that the defendant Ryan Patterson engaged in a prolonged pattern of predatory behavior toward the victim, culminating in a violent attack on December 24th. Her voice was unwavering. She outlined the timeline, the stalking, the thefts, the financial fraud, the escalating threats, the attack itself. But when Castellano rose to give his rebuttal, the atmosphere shifted, tightening with tension. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "what we have here is not the pattern of a dangerous young man, but rather the emotional instability of a troubled girl struggling with jealousy and personal issues." My jaw tightened. Nina's grip on my arm steadied me. Castellano continued. The victim has a documented history of therapy following her father's death. Her emotional state has been fragile. It is entirely possible she misinterpreted events in the home. He gestured lightly toward Ryan, who lowered his head just enough to appear sympathetic. My client has maintained from the beginning that he attempted to help Miss Carter when she injured herself falling near the stairs. The suggestion that she was attacked is unsupported by logic and driven by her desire for attention. The words sliced through me. My desire for attention. That same accusation my mother had used as I lay bleeding on the floor. Morrison rose calmly. The state would like to present evidence. Over the next hour, she laid out everything meticulously. The video clips showing Ryan entering my room, rifling through my belongings, staring at me while I slept. The financial records tracing the gambling payments to devices linked to him. The photos from the pawn shop. The prescription medication found in his locker. The forensic analysis proving the angle of my wound was not self-inflicted. The fingerprints on the knife. The neighbor statements. The digital timestamps. Every piece removed oxygen from the defense's argument. Castellano shifted in his seat more than once. When the video of Ryan watching me sleep played, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening. Then came the moment I dreaded most, when I had to testify. The bailiff called me to the stand. I stood slowly, my legs trembling but holding steady. The walk to the witness chair felt impossibly long. I took my oath, sat, and folded my hands tightly to stop them from shaking. Morrison approached with a soft expression. "Melissa, I know this is difficult, but you are safe." I nodded, swallowing back fear. She began with simple questions, my name, my relation to the defendant, how long we had lived together. Then she guided me through the events leading to the attack. I spoke slowly, but my voice did not break. I told the courtroom about the missing money, the invasion of my privacy, the fraud, the night of the 23rd, the threats, and finally the attack. When I described the moment the knife entered my side, the room went silent. Not a whisper, not a breath, just stunned, horrified silence. Morrison nodded gently and stepped back. No further questions. Then Castellano approached. His tone was smooth but sharp around the edges, a practiced blend of politeness and accusation. "Melissa," he began, "do you consider yourself a particularly emotional person?" "Objection," Morrison said immediately. "Relevance." "Sustained," the judge replied. "Try again, Mr. Castellano." He shifted tactics. "You claim Ryan entered your room to stalk you. Is it possible you misinterpreted his actions due to stress?" "No," I answered firmly. "It is not possible. You say he attacked you. Did you see the knife before you were injured?" "Yes." He held it. "Did you provoke him?" "No." "Did you fall?" "No." "Did you black out?" "Only after he stabbed me." His jaw tightened. He tried one last question. "You were in therapy, correct?" "Yes. And therapy can sometimes lead to emotional exaggeration of normal events." "Objection." "Sustained." He stepped back, defeated. When I stepped down from the witness stand, my knees trembled, but I felt taller somehow, steadier, stronger. After short deliberation, Judge March announced her findings. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented during this hearing, this court finds probable cause that the defendant committed the offenses charged. The case will proceed to trial. Ryan's face crumpled with fury. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. Charles muttered something hateful under his breath, but the judge was not finished. She looked directly at me. "Miss Carter, your courage today is noted." The courtroom exhaled collectively as she adjourned the hearing, and I realized something profound as I walked out with Nina and the detectives. This was the first time my truth had been heard in a room full of people. The first time the world saw him the way I had always seen him. The first time I was not invisible, and it was only the beginning. The trial officially began on February 22nd, nearly 2 months after the night Ryan plunged a knife into my side. By then, the stitches had been removed, but the scar remained a pale, jagged reminder carved into my skin like an accusation, a wound that echoed every betrayal I had lived through. Physically, I could walk without assistance, though every now and then a sharp ache would ripple across my abdomen when I moved too quickly. Emotionally, I was still a patchwork of fragile pieces barely held together, but I had learned enough through therapy to stand a little taller, breathe a little deeper, and remind myself that I deserved this day. I deserved justice. Nina drove me to the courthouse again, her presence grounding me as the cold February wind whipped through the air. This time, the building looked less intimidating, not because it had changed, but because I had. Stepping through the courthouse doors did not feel like walking into a battlefield anymore. It felt like walking toward an ending I had fought hard to earn. And maybe even a beginning. The courtroom was fuller this time. More reporters, more spectators, more officers. Though the case was not a national headline, a story of a blended family torn apart by violence and deception on Christmas Eve naturally drew local attention. I took my seat behind the prosecution table while Assistant District Attorney Morrison organized her paperwork with calm, steady hands. She nodded at me, a small gesture of reassurance. "You did the hardest part already, Melissa. The rest is just truth doing what truth does." The defense table was a picture of desperation disguised as strategy. Castellano sat rigid, flipping through documents with the frantic energy of someone desperately searching for loopholes. Next to him, Ryan looked smaller than ever in his juvenile detention uniform. His face was pale, his hair unkempt, and the defiant spark he once wore proudly had dimmed to something colder, something hollowed out. But when he made eye contact with me, hatred flared again. His lips curled, his eyes narrowed. He mouthed something sharp enough to sting even across the courtroom. "You ruined everything." I inhaled slowly, feeling the tremor in my fingers, but the moment Morrison placed her hand gently on my forearm, the fear faded enough for me to steady myself. Then the bailiff called the room to order. "All rise." Judge Eleanor Briggs entered with a deliberate stride, her robes flowing behind her like a shadow of authority. She was known for being direct fare and uncompromising traits I had learned to appreciate deeply. Once she took her seat, the trial began. Morrison opened with a statement that resonated through every corner of the courtroom. "This case is not about sibling rivalry. This is not about misunderstandings or emotional exaggeration. This is about a young woman who endured months of stalking theft, psychological abuse, and finally a violent attempted assault that nearly ended her life. The evidence will show a clear pattern of escalating behavior, and it will show that those who should have protected her chose to ignore her instead." She outlined the timeline with surgical precision, each point measured, each accusation supported by documentation, footage, testimony. When Castellano rose to deliver his opening, he relied on the same weak narrative he had attempted during the preliminary hearing. This is a family tragedy blown out of proportion by emotion, misinterpretation, and the unfortunate instability of the alleged victim. His words earned a quiet ripple of disapproval from the gallery. "Ryan Patterson is not a criminal," he continued. "He is a frightened young man caught in the middle of a household conflict fueled by grief and resentment." I clenched my jaw. More lies, more minimizing, more refusal to acknowledge the damage done. But this time, the lies would not save him. The prosecution began with the digital evidence. Footage from the hidden camera was played for the courtroom. Gasps echoed through the benches as the recordings revealed Ryan entering my room, rummaging through my belongings, taking money from my wallet, photographing documents, and finally standing over me as I slept. Watching the videos again made my skin crawl, but the horror on the faces around me provided something like healing. They saw it too, saw what I had lived with, saw the truth I had been screaming into a void for months. Next came the financial records. A banking expert testified that the credit card opened in my name was linked directly to Ryan's IP address, email account, and device. Another expert presented evidence of online gambling payments tied to his digital wallet. Pawn shop owners identified him as the seller of the items found to be mine. Then came the forensic evidence. The medical examiner explained the angle and depth of my wound. "The injury is consistent with an offensive action by another person, not a self-inflicted wound," she said firmly. The courtroom held its breath. My mother and Charles sat together in the second row. My mother's shoulders trembled. Charles stared stiffly forward, refusing to look at anyone. When the neighbor who had seen Ryan carrying bags late at night testified, describing how he often saw Ryan loading electronics into the trunk of his car, Charles finally dropped his head into his hands. But the most damning evidence came when Detective Chin took the stand. She described the moment they opened Ryan's school locker and found prescription bottles, including my medication, alongside items stolen from other students. She walked the court through every piece of digital data, every physical item, every fingerprint. The evidence shows a deliberate, organized pattern of theft, identity fraud, and escalation into violent behavior, she concluded. Castellano tried to object, tried to poke holes, tried to imply manipulation or coincidence, but each objection fell flat. Every attempt to spin the narrative crumbled under the weight of the facts. Then came the moment that twisted my stomach so tightly I thought I would collapse. Ryan chose to testify. Castellano placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder as he took the stand, trying to present him as a frightened youth instead of a predator. But the moment Ryan opened his mouth, his mask cracked. He spoke calmly at first, claimed he never meant to hurt me, claimed he was just trying to scare her because she kept lying about him. But under cross-examination, Morrison pushed him with quiet, relentless questions. Why were you in her room? Why were her belongings in your possession? Why are your fingerprints on the knife? Why does the video show you watching her sleep for 10 minutes? His answers grew increasingly frantic. He stuttered. He contradicted himself. At one point, he blurted out, "She was trying to ruin my life." She knew what she was doing. She had to be stopped. The courtroom went silent. Morrison stepped forward. "So, you admit you stabbed her?" Ryan paled. "I did not say I did not mean—" "But the damage was done." Judge Briggs leaned forward. Her expression did not soften. "Not once." After closing arguments, after the evidence had been laid bare, after every lie had been peeled back to reveal the rot beneath, she announced her verdict with a clarity that felt like justice being forged in real time. "The defendant, Ryan Patterson, is guilty on all charges." My breath left me in a single trembling exhale. My mother began to sob. Charles stared at the floor. Ryan shook his head in disbelief, lips trembling. But Judge Briggs wasn't finished. "Please rise for sentencing." She looked directly at Ryan, her voice unwavering. "You have shown a chilling pattern of entitlement manipulation and violence. You invaded the privacy of a vulnerable family member, stole from her, impersonated her, and finally attempted to cause her serious harm. You will be remanded to juvenile detention until the age of 21, followed by 5 years of supervised probation." Gasps filled the courtroom. Ryan's knees nearly buckled. Judge Briggs continued, turning her gaze to my mother and Charles. "As for Linda Carter and Charles Patterson, your failure to protect this young woman, your attempts to manipulate this investigation, and your dismissive cruelty toward her trauma are inexcusable. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory parenting classes, and full financial responsibility for Melissa's medical and therapeutic care." My mother covered her face as sobs shook her shoulders. Charles stared straight ahead, jaw slack, defeated. Then Judge Briggs turned to me. "Miss Carter, this court recognizes your extraordinary courage." Her voice softened just slightly. "You were failed by the people who should have protected you, and yet you fought for the truth. You fought for your life. And today, truth prevailed." The gavel struck, a sound like a door slamming behind the past, a sound like freedom. The weeks after the trial settled around me like a strange, heavy fog, the kind that follows a devastating storm. Not dangerous anymore, just disorienting in its quiet. Justice had been delivered. Ryan was in custody. My mother and Charles had been sentenced. The courtroom, with all its painful memories and sharp truths, was behind me. And yet every morning I woke with a hollow ache in my chest, as if my body had not yet realized the danger was gone. Healing, I learned, was not a moment. It was a process. And sometimes it felt almost as terrifying as the trauma itself. For the first week after the trial, I stayed at Nina's family home, sleeping in their small guest room with pale blue walls and warm blankets that smelled faintly of lavender. It was the safest I had felt in years, but safety did not erase the nightmares. At night, my dreams dragged me back to that hallway. The sound of footsteps, the gleam of a knife, the soft whisper of, You should have kept your mouth shut, looping through my mind like a malicious lullaby. I woke gasping more times than I could count, fingers clutched around the bandaged scar on my side as if Ryan's hand still held the knife. Nina slept in the next room, and whenever she heard me stirring or crying out, she would appear in my doorway, sitting on the edge of my bed until the shaking stopped. Sometimes she held my hand, sometimes she just sat quietly beside me, and sometimes she whispered, "You are safe," over and over until the words finally sank into the cracks inside me. During the day, I began therapy sessions twice a week with Dr. Harper, the therapist, who had already known so much of my past, but now guided me deeper into the pieces I had been too afraid to examine. She wore soft sweaters and spoke with a calm that somehow made the room feel warmer. The first session after the trial was the hardest. I remember staring at her bookshelf, unable to meet her eyes as I confessed what I had been carrying. I know he is gone. I know I am safe. But every time I close my eyes, I am back there. I keep expecting him to come around a corner. I keep expecting them to tell me I am lying. Dr. Harper nodded gently. Your body is still reacting to danger even though your mind knows you survived it. Trauma stores itself physically, Melissa. It does not disappear just because the threat is gone. Her words cracked something open inside me. I cried quietly at first, then in heavy shaking sobs that soaked the edge of my sleeve. Dr. Harper did not interrupt. She let me fall apart. She let me release months, years of swallowed fear. And when the tears finally slowed, she handed me a tissue and said, "Healing is not linear. Some days will feel like steps forward. Some will feel like steps back. Both are normal. Both are progress." She asked me what safety felt like. I could not answer for a long time. I realized I had never truly felt safe not in that house, not in my own room, not in my own skin. The idea of learning safety again felt impossible, like asking a bird with a broken wing to fly before the bones had knit back together. But Dr. Harper reminded me that healing happens inch by inch, breath by breath, moment by moment. Over the next few weeks, she taught me grounding exercises to calm the panic attacks that hit without warning. She taught me how to differentiate memories from flashbacks, how to breathe through the tremors instead of fighting them, how to take back ownership of space's sensations and memories that trauma had claimed. Some days, I felt strong enough to sit at the kitchen table with Nina's family and laugh at her father's terrible jokes. Other days, I barely left the guest room curled beneath the blankets, as waves of sadness rolled through me. I learned to accept both. Healing did not require perfection. It only required persistence. The scar itself became part of the journey. At first, I could barely look at it without shaking. It felt like proof not of survival, but of being targeted, violated, harmed. I avoided mirrors. I showered in the dark. But slowly, through therapy, something shifted. The scar was still an injury, still a reminder, but it also became a symbol of what I had endured. Not a mark of weakness, but of resilience. A physical representation of the night I refused to die. Nina helped in her own way, too. She tried not to force normalcy on me, but she brought light into dark days without even realizing it. She cooked with me when my appetite returned in small bursts. She played music while we folded laundry or drove to therapy sessions. She watched movies with me on nights when silence felt too loud, and she never treated me as fragile even when I was. She treated me like someone capable of healing someone worth healing. Still, the biggest challenge came the day I received a letter from my mother. It was forwarded to Nina's address, and when I saw her handwriting on the envelope, my hands went cold. Nina saw my reaction and offered to throw it away without reading, but some part of me needed to know what she could possibly say. I opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was long, but not apologetic. She wrote about how devastated she was, how she had failed to see things clearly, how she hoped one day we could rebuild our relationship. But every sentence was overshadowed by a quiet, unmistakable plea. She wanted forgiveness without taking responsibility. She wanted connection without accountability. She wanted me back only now that the illusion of her perfect family had shattered. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I did not respond. Healing meant building boundaries strong enough to keep old wounds from reopening. It meant reclaiming power from the people who had taken so much. It meant choosing myself. One of the most profound moments of healing came unexpectedly. It was late February, and Nina and I were sitting at a small lake near her house wrapped in coats and scarves, as ducks cut slow ripples across the icy water. She asked me quietly, "What do you want now? Not what happened? Not what you lost. What do you want for your life?" The question stunned me. For so long, my entire existence had revolved around surviving my own home, navigating fear, avoiding conflict, trying desperately to be believed. I had never been allowed to want anything for myself. I stared out at the lake breath fogging in the cold air. Finally, the answer came. I want to help people who feel the way I did. I want to be the person I needed. Nina smiled softly. "I think you already are." Her words settled deep inside me, anchoring themselves in a place untouched by fear. It was then that I realized healing was not just about recovering from what happened. It was about choosing who I would be because of it. Choosing a life built by my hands, not shaped by someone else's cruelty. It would take time. Years, maybe. And there would still be nights when I woke shaking, still days when a creak in the floorboards made my heart race. But I was no longer trying to heal alone. I had support. I had truth. I had freedom. And for the first time in my life, I had a future that belonged to me. 1 year later, on this next Christmas Eve, I found myself sitting inside a small diner at the edge of town, its neon sign flickering against the glass like a heartbeat pulsing through the night. Snow fell steadily outside, coating the streets in silent white, and a soft hum of Christmas music drifted from the speakers overhead. The warm lights reflected off the chrome napkin dispensers and the glossy surface of the counter where I rested my hands, fingers tapping a quiet rhythm that matched the steady comfort of my breathing. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be here alive, calm, safe, I would have laughed or cried or both. But as I looked around the diner, I realized how much could change in 12 months when someone chose to rebuild their life piece by fragile piece. Nina sat across from me, stirring sugar into her hot chocolate with a familiar concentration that made me smile despite myself. Her scarf was draped loosely around her neck, her hair tied back in a messy bun that she never bothered to fix even when it fell apart. The booth beside us was occupied by Detective Grant Alvarez, his jacket draped over the seat, the tired kindness in his eyes softened by the holiday glow. He had become part of my extended circle in a way I never expected someone who checked in not because of a case, but because he genuinely cared whether I was okay. Next to him sat my therapist, Dr. Harper, sipping tea with both hands wrapped around the cup, her calm presence anchoring the air the way it always did. I scanned the faces of the people around me and felt something unfamiliar swell in my chest. Something warm. Something like gratitude, yes, but more than that, belonging. These were the people who showed up when my world fell apart, the people who believed me when my own family did not, the people who fought for me when I was too broken to fight for myself. And now 1 year later, they were here to celebrate not the trauma I survived, but the life I was rebuilding. Nina nudged my foot under the table. "You look like you're a million miles away." I shook my head softly. "No, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." She smiled, her eyes flickering with the same warmth she had shown me the first night I arrived at her home, bleeding and terrified. I glanced out the window again, fogging the glass with my exhale. In the reflection, I saw a girl I barely recognized anymore. Not because she looked different, but because she carried herself differently. The Melissa who sat in that diner had learned to breathe again. She had learned to walk without fear. She had learned to exist without shrinking. She had learned to trust her own voice. It had taken a year of therapy, countless sleepless nights, and slow, steady steps through darkness, but I had finally stepped into a version of myself that felt real. Not the version shaped by fear. Not the version molded by manipulation, but the version that had been waiting beneath the weight of it all. Earlier that month, I had received my acceptance letter into the State University's criminal justice program. When I opened the envelope standing in Nina's kitchen with shaking hands, I felt something inside me ignite a purpose I had only hinted at during therapy. I wanted to help people. I wanted to understand the system that had saved my life. I wanted to become part of the network that protected those who had no one else. Alvarez had been the first to congratulate me. "You'll be great," he had said, clapping a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You already think like an investigator." Dr. Harper had smiled knowingly. Trauma survivors often make extraordinary advocates, Melissa. They see the world with clarity others sometimes miss. Nina, of course, had screamed loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. She bought me a journal the next day, the first page filled with her messy handwriting for the future you're about to build. Use this to dream big. I had already filled half of it with ideas, aspirations, and tentative plans. It became my roadmap, a tangible reminder that healing did not end with a scar. It created space for new beginnings. Christmas Eve in the diner was meant to mark that milestone, a celebration of surviving, of healing, of growing. Yet even in the warmth of that moment, I could not fully shake the echoes of the past. A year ago, at this exact time, I had been lying on the cold floor of my family's living room, bleeding as the people who were supposed to love me believed I was creating drama. I had nearly died for daring to tell the truth. Tonight I was alive because I chose myself instead. Nina reached across the table, interrupting my thoughts. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "Better than okay, actually." "You sure?" she teased. "You look like you're holding back some profound holiday speech about life and resilience." I laughed softly. "Maybe I am." Alvarez leaned back in his seat. "Let's hear it." "You've earned the right to be profound." I hesitated, then exhaled. "I guess I just keep thinking about how different things are now. How much can change in a year. A year ago, I didn't think I'd make it to Christmas. I didn't think I'd live to see another snowfall. I didn't think anyone would ever believe me." I paused, feeling my throat tighten. "But you all did. You believed me. You fought for me. You saved my life." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Harper reached across the table, placing her hand over mine in a gesture so gentle it felt like a balm. "You saved your own life, Melissa. We simply helped you do what you were already strong enough to do." Her words settled in my chest like warmth spreading through cold fingers. I looked around the table again, taking in every familiar face. The future felt possible for the first time. Not guaranteed, not simple, but possible. After dinner, we stepped out into the cold. Snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, landing on our coats, settling into the folds of scarves and hair. The world felt quiet, as if holding its breath. Nina wrapped her arm around mine. "What now, future crime fighter?" I smiled up at the night sky. I want to help people who were like me, people who had their voices taken, people who were told they were lying, people who were left alone in dark houses." Alvarez nodded approvingly. "The system needs people like you, people who understand both sides of the fight." Dr. Harper added softly, "Pain can build walls or open doors. You chose the door. Remember that." I looked out at the falling snow, the lights reflecting off each tiny flake, like small pieces of hope descending from the sky. For the first time in a long time, the world did not feel dangerous. It felt open, wide, waiting. As we walked to the parking lot, my breath rising in white clouds, I realized something profound. My family had tried to destroy me to protect their illusion. They had tried to bury me under their denial. They had tried to silence me for good. But I had survived. I had healed, and I had found a family not through blood, but through truth. People who chose me because they saw me, not because they owned me. And in the quiet snowfall of that Christmas Eve, I understood that survival was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. I had a future to build, justice to chase, voices to amplify, lives to protect. My story had taken everything from me, but it had also given me something powerful in return: purpose. And under the falling snow, surrounded by the people who stood beside me when the world fell apart, I whispered to myself the truth I now carried with unwavering certainty. I am free, and I am finally living. There is something I want to say now that you have walked with me through this entire journey, something I hope reaches you wherever you are sitting tonight, Whether you are watching this on your phone, in a quiet bedroom, listening through headphones while you cook dinner, or letting this story play in the background as snow falls gently outside your window. If you stayed until the end, if you heard every moment of fear, betrayal, and survival, then this message is for you. Many of us grow up believing that family is supposed to be the safest place in the world, but the truth is that not everyone gets that kind of family, and some of us spend years trying to convince ourselves that we are the problem, when in reality we were simply asking for the bare minimum. Maybe you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you have lived with people who used your trust against you. People who called you dramatic or ungrateful when you tried to set boundaries. People who told you that what you experienced was not real. If any part of my story reminded you of your own life, please hear me when I say this. You deserve safety, you deserve peace, and you deserve to be believed. It does not matter how old you are or how long you have carried those wounds. Healing has no expiration date, and neither does truth. If you have ever been gaslit by someone who should have protected you, you are not alone. If you have ever been dismissed by people who claimed to love you, you are not alone. If you have ever been told that your pain was all in your head, I promise you there are millions of people out there who have lived the same pattern, who know the same confusion, the same heartbreak, the same quiet desperation of wondering whether you are losing your mind, or whether everyone around you simply refuses to see what you see. And maybe, like me, you have carried years of self-blame, because it felt easier to think something was wrong with you than to accept the truth that the ones hurting you never intended to stop. But here is the thing, surviving something like this does not make you weak. It makes you incredibly strong. You learned to keep going even when no one believed you. You learned to trust yourself again after being told your reality was wrong. You learned to protect your heart even after the people closest to you bruised it. That strength is not small. That strength is the beginning of your freedom. And if you are still in a situation where you feel unsafe, unheard, or unseen, I want you to know that there is a world waiting for you outside of that pain. People who will listen. People who will care. People who will fight for you, the way Nina Detective Alvarez and Dr. Harper fought for me. If you reach out, even if your voice shakes, someone will hear you. And if the first person does not believe you, try again. Keep speaking. Keep reaching. You deserve support. You deserve compassion. You deserve a life where you do not have to flinch at footsteps in the hallway or silence yourself for the comfort of people who refuse to treat you with decency. I know it can feel terrifying to imagine a different life. For a long time, I could not picture a world where I was not constantly on edge, waiting for something to go wrong. But healing starts with one truth spoken out loud. Healing begins the moment you choose yourself. And maybe tonight, after hearing my story, you feel something stirring in your chest. Maybe it is recognition. Maybe it is sadness. Maybe it is anger. Or maybe it is hope. Whatever you are feeling, it is valid and it belongs to you. If you feel inspired to share even one sentence about your own experience, this comment section is a safe place. Your story matters. Your voice matters, and when you speak, other people who are silently suffering will realize they are not alone. Sometimes your courage becomes someone else's lifeline without you ever knowing it. And if you do not want to share publicly, that is okay too. Just know that what you have lived through is real and it deserves acknowledgement. Let this video be a reminder that family is not defined by blood or last names or holiday traditions. Family is the people who choose you, who respect you, who protect your well-being even when it is inconvenient. If your family has failed you, that failure belongs to them, not you. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to build a new beginning. You are allowed to redefine what family means to you. And if this is your first step toward healing, I am honored that you took it here with me in this moment. As you close this video, I hope you carry one thing with you. You are not broken. You are becoming. And your story does not end in the place where someone tried to silence you. It begins in the moment you decide that your life is worth fighting for. If you have ever wondered whether your voice matters, let this be your sign it does. You matter. Your safety matters. Your truth matters. Thank you for listening to mine. And whenever you are ready, the world is waiting to hear yours.